I'm Karima Brown. It's Sunday and it's time for The Fix. Welcome to this edition of The Fix, where every Sunday we hold those in power to account. We tell you what matters, how to fix you, and why you should care. On Thursday, President Cyril Ramaphosa again highlighted the need for a tough stance against corrupt officials when he issued a special proclamation to empower the SIU to investigate all tenders and contracts issued since the national state of disaster had been declared. But corruption, of course, precedes COVID-19. Remember the state capture years and the way in which state-owned companies were hollowed out and repurposed for corrupt ends. Today, we take a look at how far we have come with the process at Prasa, where the administrator is being stymied in an effort to clean up the rail passenger agency. To talk about this, I'm joined by the Prasa spokesperson, Mr. Makosini Mkichwa. Good morning. Thank you so very much for joining us here, Makosini. Now, you have taken bold steps. In March of this year, the agency placed 12 of its senior officials on suspension on allegations of corruption. And of course, your administrator has tried to implement quite a number of steps, including reducing the executive from, I think, something like 21 to 9 members. But he is facing stiff opposition from inside. Can you tell us who exactly in the Prasa leadership structure, as we understand it, is giving the administrator a headache?
I think the first thing to understand, good morning, Karima, and thank you for having me. I think the most important thing to understand is that when an organization or a government department or a state-owned company has been overrun by malfeasance and corruption, some of the people who hold strategic positions stop working to serve the people of South Africa. They stop working to serve commuters. Now it becomes a feeding frenzy where they are worried about their own interests. And if what they are doing is also good for the commuters, then that's just an add-on. That's a bonus. But what they're mostly concerned about is their own interests and the interests that they represent. Now, if you look at the executive of Prasa, you correctly pointed out that there has to be a reduction in the number of executives that we have, because revenue has been going down consistently. We're operating now at about 15% of the capacity. But in terms of the salary bill, especially at the executive level, it remains stubbornly high. It's not going down. So the opposition that the administrator is getting from strategic people who are holding positions within the organization. But also, if you look at supply chain management, which is I would say it's the cesspool really of all the problems, because you can't do anything without the supply chain management. Prasa is a company that's owned by the public. It's subject to the Public Finance Management Act. You can't, whereas Prasa has money, you can't take the money and there are people who are looking for jobs. You can't take money and give people who are looking for jobs and let the job get done. You have to go through supply chain management, and that's where the frustration has been so far.
You know, Makosini, I'm going to come to supply chain management because it's a feature in almost all state-owned companies. But I want to return to the size of the executive. And the reason why I want to do this is because I also want to inform our viewers. 2 weeks ago, we had the YCL Secretary General of Gauteng, Gabo Morife, on, and he criticized the National Youth Development Agency, who has a budget of 400 million rand. And he said 70% of that is spent on salaries. And the NYDA demanded a right of reply, and they were meant to come onto the show today, and they pulled out at the last minute. So it is a feature that the bulk of the money is often made available to these agencies go to salaries instead of the work that Prasa must do. What is to be done around this? I mean, you are saying you want to reduce the executive. Take our viewers into confidence. How big is the executive? What size do you want it? And what kind of saving are you looking to make from, taking that bloated executive down?
Right now, the executive is about 17, officials, which is just too much for any one person who must sit at the top of the structure to handle. There are no synergies there. It also comes from the past of Prasa, where people were working in silos, where there wasn't, coming together and pulling together. So we are looking at, the administrator is looking to reduce the number of the executives from 17 to 9, but obviously that is being challenged, that is being opposed. But we understand that that was always going to happen, because it simply means that fewer people are going to be drawing salaries. And, if you look at, Prasa, the way it is functioning, if you look at the number of trains that are delayed and all those things, that has to be reflected on the executive. You can't have an executive that looks like there's no problem, but when you go to the ground, there are many problems. But I think you also raise another important issue of drawing parallels with the NYDA. Prasa sits with 20 billion rands in unspent capital expenditure. Now, just for context, SAA, for SAA to be able to keep planes in the air, they need 10 billion rands.
Yeah.
Prasa sits with 20 billion rands. Now, if a private sector company hoards 20 billion rands, that is unpatriotic. But the standard must be higher for a state-owned company, because state-owned companies are supposed to lead. So for Prasa, for a state-owned company to hoard 20 billion rands from the economy, in my view, that is criminal, that is treason. Because if you take all that money, if it were to be invested into the economy to create jobs, it would support SMMEs, but also South Africa will be left with an infrastructure that is modern, that is going to increase its value as a tourism destination, that is going to increase its attractiveness as an investment destination, because foreign investors, even local investors, before they invest into the economy, they want to see that the public transport system works very well. Now, if you have what is supposed to be the backbone of public transport system being dysfunctional, it just simply means that the country becomes less and less attractive. So it is important for Prasa to spend that money. And if you look at the infrastructure, the way it is being decimated, the way it's, it is aged and aging, you need that money to be invested into the economy, but you can't do it if you have the kind of opposition and the kind of malfeasance that we get within supply chain management in Prasa.
Now, 12 of these people have been suspended. Makhosini, how senior are these 12 people? And we've seen so many officials in these institutions being suspended, but on full pay. And of course, the cases are few and far between. And there's also often a wrangling between internal processes in the organization vis-a-vis criminal or civil proceedings that other institutions such as your Hawks, your NPA needs to take on. So just give us an update on where the cases are at with those that have been suspended.
Well, 4 have been fired already, and those were linked with the irregular security contracts that were deemed that way by the Public Protector and the Auditor General. 4 were fired, and the processes have to go through for the others. The problem is that, the unintended, I would say, outcome of the lockdown was that people could not meet so that those disciplinary processes could proceed. But, the process to clean up Prasa continues. We get a lot of opposition. People sometimes take us to court, and in some instances, you don't understand sometimes what, informs the court decisions that get taken. But nonetheless, you still have to do what you have to do. Because if you take Prasa, an organization that was described so many times, it was described by the Minister Fikile Mbalula and Bongisizwe Mpondo, the administrator, as a broken business.
Yeah.
Now, for it to be broken, you have to look internally at the people who are inside the organization, if they are the right people, if they have the right skills to be where they are. And, it is inevitable. You just cannot avoid it, that, some people will have to be exited from the organization, but also with that comes, the resistance and the fights that they put up, sometimes using the courts of law. But we still have to proceed nonetheless.
Let's talk about the supply chain management. And of course, we've seen historically, this is where, people set up almost a snout-to-tail corruption network, and people are captured at various stages of this value chain. Take viewers through how this supply chain has been corrupted and what Prasa and the Transport Minister has put in place to correct it. Where does the oversight lie now when, any assets are to be acquired?
I think the most important thing for me to say is that Minister Fikile Mbalula and the Department of Transport, they got one thing right, and that was to identify the problem. That, Prasa for the past 5 years hasn't had a permanent CEO. There has been a revolving door of boards of directors. That's because, all those were changes that were happening at a superficial level. And the malfeasance, where it exists, where it's rooted within the organization itself, just remained untempered. So, bringing in a new board, I promise you, was not going to make a difference with Prasa. Even bringing in another CEO was not going to help. What needed to happen was what is happening now, subjecting Prasa to what I would call shock treatment. And that is exactly what is happening now. You have to dismantle this gang of rogue elements within Prasa that will not allow you to procure anything unless their interest is served in what needs to be procured, which is why you would see it with 20 billion rands in unspent capital expenditure when the organization desperately needs that money to be invested into the infrastructure. So you've got to dismantle those groups, because sometimes they work against each other. You'll find that one group is trying to pursue a certain procurement of a strategic asset or whatever the case may be, but the other group, the other faction, works against that. So you find yourself in a situation where nothing gets done. Prasa continues to accumulate money in unspent capital expenditure, and the people who matter the most, which are the commuters, especially poor people and low-income earners, who depend on the trains for an affordable and reliable means of transportation. They are the people who suffer the most. And the country suffers the most, and the degradation of the company losing its value, it just simply means that the people of South Africa, who are the real owners of Prasa, are having the value of the company that they owned being depreciated. And that we have to fight, and we understand that, for Prasa to be placed under what you would call administration, it just simply means that the necessary things that need to be done for the company to be turned around are going to be done. And, what is necessary, we make it possible.
Makosini, one of the things that people often find difficult is the slow pace of reform. So many would say you've put in an administrator, you've given that person powers, and yet, as you say, you are facing very steep opposition from people with deeply vested interest in the place. One of the issues, for example, is commuter safety and just procuring security services. Historically, we've had a railway police, for example, but we know that Prasa is being stolen from left, right and centre, from copper cables to actual railway lines. Take us through whether any new security services have been procured or whether you're insourcing this. Are you taking the tender process out of that, function at the moment?
Look, what we have decided to do, because, Prasa is going to be here for a long time. Let's just say that this experiment of outsourcing security did not work very well, because what it did, it just created, a factory of corruption inside and outside of Prasa, where the people who were actually doing the work, when their jobs were not even secured, were not even guaranteed, some of them would work and not get paid. So what we've decided to do, of course, under the instruction of the government, which now has, that policy framework of insourcing rather than the outsourcing. Also, Minister Mbalula has been, very, very hard on this one, that we have to insource. This is going to solve our problems, because it simply means we are now recruiting 3,100 people who are going to guard our network and infrastructure. That is 3,100 families, and we're going to be sourcing them from communities which are near our infrastructure or near our network, because history has taught us that where you get people to guard an infrastructure that benefits them, you enlist them to guard that infrastructure, they perform much better than people who come from outside to do that. So we are quite worried about the ramped up attack on our infrastructure that we've seen. And also it worries me, and I think, I have to be very careful in saying this, that the majority of the people who have been arrested recently, especially after the appointment of retired Brigadier General Tebogo Rakau as the acting head of security, we've seen ramped up arrests. By the way, this is breaking news. It hasn't been in the news anywhere. We arrested one employee of Prasa over the weekend, Prasa Security working with the police, and also arrested a former employee of Prasa who has a company that deals with rail, stuff, right? And they were found with about 2 million rands worth of assets that belong to Prasa. I think they're going to be appearing at the Germiston Magistrate Court tomorrow. But with the point that I'm trying to make here is we are ramping up arrests, we are securing the network, but also it's going to be important for us to make sure that because I really do not know how many security guards you would need to employ to guard the thousands and thousands of our network if most South Africans believe that it's okay for Prasa to be harvested and its assets to be taken and sold. And I think it's also important for law enforcement, or let me just say the criminal justice system, to fully appreciate what is happening, because an attack on Prasa's infrastructure is an attack on the country, is an attack on the economy, is an attack on poor people, is an attack on low-income earners, and it must be attended to that way. So far, what we've seen is that people get arrested and 2 days later they are out. They are not charged with the crimes that they should be charged with, which is economic sabotage. Because what is basically happening is that you are destroying the economy of the country. Because if you destroy the backbone of the public transport, you are basically destroying the economy of the country.
All right, Makosini, we have to leave it there. Some breaking news, as the spokesperson of Prasa has said, 2 employees arrested over the weekend, one with a rail company, appearing tomorrow in our courts. It's, of course, a story that we will keep a watching brief on. The key question for many of us is, where is the NPA? Where is the law enforcement agency? Why are people not being charged? Coming up still on The Fix, can Robert McBride clean up the mess at South Africa's spy agencies? Stay tuned.